The Jefferson County Courthouse was no stranger to fear. Its heavy oak doors creaked open each morning, letting in not only the humid Alabama air, but also the unspoken weight of injustice. Everyone who entered knew this was Judge Meredith Langford's domain, a place where fairness rarely survived. Judge Langford had ruled from the bench for 24 years, her presence as cold and sharp as the gavel she wielded. Her gray hair was pulled into a tight bun, her lips pressed into a permanent frown. Behind her glasses, her eyes scanned the courtroom like a hawk circling prey. She was feared by lawyers, loathed by defendants, and silently resented by the black community who knew her bias all too well. On this particular morning, the case of Tyrone Wills was about to begin. Tyrone, a young black man barely in his 20s, sat hunched at the defense table. His wrists trembled slightly as he adjusted the collar of his cheap suit. He had been accused of armed robbery, a crime he insisted he had not committed, but in Judge Langford's courtroom, innocence often meant nothing. The jury had been selected, the prosecution was confident, and the weight of history pressed down on his shoulders. As the bailiff called for order, Langford smirked. She barely glanced at Tyrone before flipping open the case file. To her, he was already guilty. Around the room, people exchanged uneasy looks. Everyone knew how this story usually ended. Then something unusual happened. The courtroom doors opened again and in walked a boy, no more than 14. He wore a clean white shirt and neatly pressed khaki pants, his posture calm, his step steady. His dark eyes carried a strange mixture of youth and wisdom. He moved with quiet confidence, not like a child lost in a courthouse, but like someone who belonged there. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the boy took a seat behind the defense table. Just a few feet from Tyrone, the lawyers glanced at each other, puzzled. Judge Langford narrowed her eyes. She tapped her gavel once, the sound sharp as a whip. "Order in the court," she said coolly. Then, with a mocking smile, she looked directly at the boy. "And who might you be? This is not a playground. Children don't belong in my courtroom." Her words dripped with arrogance, and laughter echoed softly from a few in the gallery. But the boy did not flinch. He looked straight back at her, his voice steady. "My name is Elijah Davis," he said, "and I'm here for justice." The room went silent. Even Tyrone turned his head, confusion flickering in his eyes. Judge Langford raised an eyebrow, then chuckled coldly. "Justice?" she repeated, her laugh low and dismissive. "Boy, you don't know the first thing about justice. This is a court of law, not a place for childish games." But Elijah didn't back down. His words were calm, yet they carried weight far beyond his years. "Sometimes, Judge, children see truth clearer than adults who hide behind robes." Gasps spread across the courtroom. The arrogance on Judge Langford's face faltered for just a moment, replaced by something else, unease. She quickly masked it with another laugh, louder this time, though it sounded forced. "You're a bold little boy," she sneered, "but this is my courtroom, and in my courtroom, your voice means nothing." Elijah leaned forward slightly, his eyes unblinking. "We'll see about that." The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel strike. Everyone in the room felt it. Something had shifted. For the first time in decades, Judge Meredith Langford was not fully in control, and no one yet realized that this boy's presence was the beginning of her downfall. The air in the courtroom felt heavier after Elijah's words. His calm defiance lingered, like a challenge no one dared to voice before. Judge Langford's lips pressed into a thin line. For years, no lawyer, no defendant, not even fellow judges had dared to speak to her like that. Yet here was a boy, no older than 14, daring to strip away her authority with a single sentence. "Bailiff," she snapped, "remove him. I will not have this distraction." The bailiff, a large man in uniform, took a cautious step toward Elijah, but before he could reach him, Elijah rose from his seat. His voice, though quiet, carried across the courtroom with surprising force. "I have the right to be here. This case affects more lives than you admit, Judge Langford." A murmur rippled through the gallery. People leaned forward, sensing something unusual. The bailiff hesitated, glancing back at the judge. Langford waved her hand dismissively, but she didn't repeat her order. Something in Elijah's eyes unsettled her. A strange maturity, a confidence that seemed out of place on such young shoulders. Tyrone, still seated at the defense table, looked at Elijah with a mix of hope and confusion. He whispered, "Kid, who are you?" Elijah only offered a small, reassuring nod before sitting back down. "Someone who knows the truth," he replied softly. Judge Langford straightened her robe, trying to recover her authority. "Truth?" she scoffed. "The only truth that matters in this room is the evidence before the court. And right now, all of it points to the guilt of your friend there." She gestured toward Tyrone, her tone cold and final. But Elijah leaned forward, his voice calm yet unshakable. "Or maybe, Judge, it points to something else. Maybe it points to your bias." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. The jury gasped. Even the prosecution froze mid-note. No one had ever accused Judge Langford openly, not in her courtroom, not to her face. Langford's laugh was sharp and cutting. "My bias? Boy, you don't even understand the word. You think you can accuse me, a federal judge, of prejudice? You are nothing but a child playing a dangerous game." Elijah didn't blink. "Children can see, when a game is rigged. And Judge, your game has gone on too long." Her face stiffened. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed her features. She adjusted her glasses, tapping her gavel as though the sharp sound could silence the truth hanging in the air. "This is nonsense. I will not waste this court's time entertaining childish accusations." But the gallery wasn't convinced. The people watching whispered among themselves, exchanging glances. They had lived under Langford's rulings for decades. They had felt the sting of her bias, even if no one dared to speak it aloud. And now, here was a boy saying what they all had wanted to. Elijah leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "You can dismiss me, Judge. You can laugh at me. But deep down, you know I'm right. And soon, everyone else will know too." The silence that followed was deafening. Langford clenched her gavel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to strike it, to shut him down, but some instinct told her doing so would only give his words more power. For the first time in years, Judge Meredith Langford felt something foreign creeping into her chest. Fear. And though no one else could see it, Elijah allowed himself the smallest knowing smile. He had not come here by accident. He had come prepared, and this was only the beginning. The courtroom was no longer the place Judge Meredith Langford commanded with unshakable authority. A new tension rippled across the room, one she hadn't felt in decades. Elijah's words lingered in the air, refusing to fade. She slammed her gavel. "This court will proceed with the trial of Tyrone Wills. The boy's interruptions are irrelevant. If he remains silent, he may stay. If not, he will be removed." The warning was sharp, but beneath her voice was an uneasiness. Everyone could hear it. Langford had always been unmovable, yet now her tone wavered ever so lightly. The prosecutor rose quickly, eager to shift the attention back to Tyrone's case. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Witnesses placed Mr. Wills near the store at the time of the robbery, and—" But before he could finish, Elijah spoke again. His voice was calm, but each word cut through the courtroom like steel. "Those same witnesses were pressured, and one of them already admitted it. To me." All eyes snapped toward him. Even Tyrone turned, his jaw dropping. The prosecutor stammered, his papers trembling in his hands. That's hearsay. This child has no authority to speak." Elijah stood. His small frame looked almost fragile beside the tall adults in the room, yet his presence was undeniable. "Authority doesn't matter when the truth is bigger than the courtroom," he said. "Judge Langford knows this. She has ignored truth before, and she plans to ignore it again today." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Judge Langford's face turned cold. "Enough," she barked, slamming her gavel so hard the wood cracked. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." But Elijah's eyes never left hers. "Contempt?" he asked softly. "The people already hold you in contempt. For years you've used this bench to silence those without power. But today, your silence won't work." The words hit like thunder. For the first time, jurors exchanged uncertain glances. The gallery whispered louder, their faith in Langford's authority unraveling. Langford leaned forward, her voice trembling with anger. "You dare accuse me of corruption? You, a boy with no education, no standing?" Elijah reached into his small bag and pulled out a folded paper. His hands were steady, his eyes sharp. I may be young, Judge, but I am not blind. This, he raised the paper high, is testimony, signed, from one of your own clerks. It proves you changed evidence in past trials. The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, murmurs filled the space until the bailiff demanded silence. Tyrone's lawyer, who had sat quietly until now, leaned forward with wide eyes. Your Honor, if this is true, the entire case— Silence, Langford roared, her face pale. This boy has fabricated lies. Nothing he says is admissible. But her voice was shaking now, no longer calm and untouchable. The gallery could hear it, and so could the jury. Elijah lowered the paper slowly, his gaze never wavering. You can call it lies, you can strike it from the record, but you can't erase what people now know. Your mask is slipping, Judge, and soon it will shatter. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Judge Langford gripped her gavel, but for the first time in her career, her hands trembled. And in that trembling, the cracks in her empire of fear began to show. The gavel that once ruled the courtroom with finality now sounded hollow. Every strike from Judge Langford seemed weaker, as if the authority she had carried for decades was slipping from her hands. Order, she shouted, but her voice betrayed something new, desperation. Elijah remained seated, calm and steady, while the gallery buzzed with whispers. People leaned forward, eyes wide, not wanting to miss a single word. They had lived too long under Langford's shadow, and now, for the first time, they saw her faltering. The prosecutor tried to regain control. Your Honor, with respect, this is a distraction. We should move forward with the robbery case against Mr. Wills. But even he spoke nervously, glancing at Elijah as though unsure of where to stand. The boy had introduced doubt, dangerous, undeniable doubt. Elijah rose once more. This is no distraction. Tyrone Wills is not on trial today. Justice itself is. And it's been on trial in this courtroom for years. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The words carried like fire, igniting hearts that had long been cold with hopelessness. Tyrone lifted his head for the first time, showing a flicker of hope. Judge Langford slammed her gavel again. You insolent child! You think you can stand here and lecture me? I am the law in this room. Elijah's eyes narrowed. His reply was calm, almost too calm. No, Judge, the law is bigger than you, and outside these walls, people are listening. As if on cue, the faint sound of voices drifted through the tall windows. People had gathered outside the courthouse, families, neighbors, activists. Word of Elijah's bold stand had spread faster than Langford expected. Phones had recorded, whispers had left the building, and now the courthouse steps were filling with protesters. The bailiff leaned close to the judge, whispering nervously, Ma'am, there's a crowd forming outside. Reporters, too. Langford's face drained of color. For 2 decades, her courtroom had been a closed kingdom, shielded from scrutiny. Now the walls were cracking, and the truth was leaking out. Elijah stepped closer to the bench, his small voice steady. The people you silenced, the ones you punished unfairly, they're waiting outside. They're ready to be heard. The gallery erupted in murmurs of agreement. A woman in the back stood up, tears in her eyes. My brother spent 10 years in prison because of you, she cried. Another man shouted, You ruined my family. Chaos threatened to consume the room, but Elijah lifted his hand. Instantly, silence fell. Somehow this boy commanded respect that even the gavel could no longer demand. He turned back to Langford. Judge, you've hidden behind this robe for too long, but a robe is just cloth. It doesn't make you just. It doesn't make you right. Langford's hand trembled around the gavel. Her composure, once unshakable, was unraveling thread by thread. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Outside, the voices grew louder, chants rising into the air. Justice for all, justice for all. Inside, Elijah's words landed like a final strike. The law no longer protects you, Judge. The truth does not fear your gavel, and soon the world will see what you've done. Ches. The silence afterward was deafening. Judge Meredith Langford, once untouchable, sat frozen on her throne of wood and velvet, shaken for the first time in her reign. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood. The fall of the gavel had already begun. The courthouse was no longer a place of silence. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones in hand, cameras flashing with every movement. The chants outside grew louder with each passing hour. Justice for all! End the bias! Inside, Judge Langford sat stiffly at the bench, her once icy calm shattered. The gallery buzzed with energy, jurors whispering nervously to one another. She had spent decades controlling every corner of this courtroom, but now control was slipping like sand through her fingers. Elijah stood tall, his white shirt glowing in the shafts of sunlight pouring through the windows. He turned slowly, his voice carrying across the packed room. This isn't just about Tyrone Wills. This is about everyone who has been crushed under this gavel. This courtroom belongs to the people, not to a single judge. The gallery erupted in applause. For once, the bailiff did not silence them. Even he seemed uncertain which side of history he should stand on. Suddenly, a man rose from the gallery, gray-haired, his eyes tired but burning with pain. "My daughter was sentenced here," he said, his voice shaking. "She was innocent, but Judge Langford gave her 20 years. 20 years!" Gasps filled the room. A woman followed, tears streaking her face. "My husband lost everything because of your rulings. You never gave him a chance." More voices joined in, stories of unfair sentences, of lives destroyed, of futures stolen. The courtroom swelled with emotion, a storm Judge Langford could no longer contain. Her gavel struck again and again, but the sound no longer silenced anyone. Outside, news crews broadcast the UPR, or Live. Across Birmingham, families tuned in, watching history unfold. And at the center of it all stood Elijah, calm, unwavering, a boy carrying the weight of justice on his small shoulders. Langford rose to her feet, her voice cracking with anger. "This is my courtroom. I will not be judged by you people. You have no power here." But Elijah stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Power isn't in the robe, Judge. Power is in truth. And truth is louder than your gavel." At that moment, the doors burst open. Federal investigators entered, led by a stern woman in a dark suit. She carried a file thick with documents. The room fell silent as she spoke. "Judge Meredith Langford, you are under investigation for judicial misconduct, evidence tampering, and racial bias. Effective immediately, you are removed from presiding over this case." The gallery exploded in cheers. Some wept, some embraced. Others raised their fists in triumph. Tyrone buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed with relief. Langford's face drained of color. For the first time, the woman who had once seemed untouchable stood powerless, her gavel slipping from her hand onto the desk with a hollow clatter. Elijah turned to Tyrone, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone anymore," he said softly. And to the people, his voice rang out like a bell. "Justice echoes. It cannot be silenced." The roar of the crowd, inside and outside the courthouse, answered him. The gavel that once silenced voices now lay forgotten on the judge's bench. Meredith Langford, pale and trembling, stood frozen as the investigators closed in around her. For 24 years she had ruled this courtroom like a queen on her throne, but now the crown had shattered. The federal officer read aloud from the file. "Our investigation has uncovered years of tampered evidence, coerced testimonies, and a repeated pattern of racial bias. Judge Meredith Langford, you will be formally charged." Gasps echoed through the room. Langford's lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. For decades she had laughed at pleas, mocked tears, and dismissed cries for justice. Now her silence was the loudest sound of all. The bailiff, who had once stood firmly by her side, slowly stepped back. Even he could no longer defend her. The robe she wore seemed smaller now, just a thin layer of cloth draped over a broken woman. At the defense table, Tyrone Wills sat with wide eyes, tears streaming freely down his face. His lawyer rose quickly, motioning to the investigators. "With this revelation, the charges against my client must be dismissed immediately." The officer nodded firmly. The case against Tyrone Wills is dropped. Cheers erupted from the gallery. Strangers embraced Tyrone, some weeping, others shouting his name. He stood shakily, overwhelmed, before collapsing into Elijah's arms. "You saved me," Tyrone whispered. Elijah shook his head gently. "No, the truth saved you. I just refused to let it stay hidden." The boy's words carried across the courtroom, quiet yet powerful. Reporters captured every syllable, their cameras flashing. Outside, the chants grew louder, echoing through the city streets. "Justice for all! Justice for all!" Langford was escorted from the bench, her hands trembling as she was led past the people she had once ruled with fear. Some spat words of anger, others simply stared, but most felt something deeper, a sense of closure, of long-awaited justice. When she disappeared through the doors, Elijah turned to face the packed courtroom. His small figure stood on the same floor where so many had once felt powerless, yet he radiated strength. "This is not just about one judge," he said firmly. "It's about remembering that respect is not earned by titles or robes or power. Respect is earned by how we treat others, by listening, by being fair, by showing kindness." The crowd listened in complete silence, his voice commanding every ear. "Never laugh at the powerless," Elijah continued, "for tomorrow they may be the voice of justice, and justice belongs to us all." Applause thundered through the courtroom. The people rose to their feet, cheering not just for Tyrone's freedom, but for the truth that had finally broken through decades of silence. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with people, families of the wrongfully convicted, activists and neighbors, all chanting Elijah's words. For the first time in years, the air in Jefferson County felt lighter, as though the weight of injustice had been lifted. Elijah stepped outside into the sunlight, the cheers washing over him. He was just a boy, but in that moment he carried the strength of generations who had long waited for justice. And though the road ahead would not be easy, one truth was clear. The echo of respect once awakened could never again be silenced.